Hello everybody, Adrian Plass here,
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
and it's number 32, which has no significance whatsoever.
Oh, except what a week it's been, really.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. It's been a really, well, I don't know how to say it, a really dreadful week in the UK, really, hasn't it? For so many families, far too many families losing people that they love, far too many people struggling to keep people alive.
Certainly a feeling that the darkness is creeping closer, isn't there?
Terrible, terrible. Having said that, there's also lots of hopeful stuff about the vaccine. It sometimes feels like the only hope for the UK at the moment, and actually in America.
Well, I thought the inauguration, which we saw quite a lot of, didn't we? And I thought, if one can put it like this, it went very well. I think it was what was needed.
I think it went well for the world, really.
Yeah.
And I think that struck me more than almost anything, Adrian, was that there's very few opportunities for leaders, important leaders, to speak out a Christian message. And actually, I think it wasn't just the words. I think it was the heart. A heart yearning for unity, yearning for peace, and yearning for hope. Really, the whole thing had that feeling.
Absolutely. I think any leaders who have a spiritual sense and a true spiritual understanding would be very glad about what happened. On that day.
I thought there was a lot of good stuff there. What is so interesting is when you come down to your own life, it's obviously so much more mundane. And I was thinking, what is the highlight or the low point of my life? And the highlight was almost a low point, which was that finally we got our car back. Those of you who might remember that I broke my ankle 2 months ago wouldn't know that the car that I was in at the time has been resting, is one way of putting it, in the very place where I broke my ankle for over 2 months.
I think there's part of us that was very nervous about actually getting it back. Someone did try and help us very kindly, but it took...
And
it was
couldn't
only
get it going.
a few days ago, wasn't it?
And of course, with the snow and everything else, the poor thing, poor old car, and it is an old car, took a very long time. I mean, it was like it coughed, it spluttered, it sent stuff out of its exhaust, and finally it got going.
Do you think the car is in a better state than I am at the moment?
I don't know. I really don't know. Well, we heard from quite a few people this week as well, didn't we? And in a way, those things reflect everything, perhaps. There was some humour and there was some sadness, and there was somebody saying, and I think put it right into perspective, they were frayed at the edges, but she was saying that a friend of hers said that she'd never thought she'd be envious of hens, and then she saw that on her box of eggs it said free range, and she decided that more than anything she wanted to be free range. I go with that.
And there was somebody else who was talking about mixed messages last week, weren't we? And she was saying about when she was working in a school, she explained to a little boy the importance of washing his hands after going to the toilet, because you have to avoid getting germs in his tummy.
Yeah.
And later on she noticed he was missing, so she went to find him. And this is our second going to look for a child in the toilet story in 2 weeks. She went to find him, and he was in the toilet, stripped to the waist, apparently, washing his tummy with soap and water everywhere. So he didn't quite get the idea.
Mixed messages can, they can have strange consequences sometimes, can't they? When you think you've heard something clearly.
Well, one of the most disappointing I ever had was when I was only 17 or something, and I was on a drama course or theatre course in Tunbridge Wells, and I arrived one day at the place where the college was, and the people on the course were all looking at me I couldn't work out what the expression on their faces was, and the person who ran the course said, "We've had Roy Bolting on the phone, who was a famous film director."
Was he Ealing Comedies?
Something like that,
yeah.
And the brothers, Bolting brothers. So, who wants you to do some drama for him. And I thought, this is it. I've done it. And everyone was kind of congratulating me. And I suddenly remembered that I had a friend called Rory Boulding, with whom I had done some very amateur acting things, and sure enough, it was him. So anyway,
well, they did say one of the things said in one of the speeches at the inauguration was to beware of the mirage as opposed to the dream. So I suppose that really fitted there, Adrian.
That's right.
Oh, very sad.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, we heard from somebody who was responding to you saying that you'd taken up finger picking again, and saying that, you know, it's made him realise he needs to have another go. But what he said was, and I'm going to read you his actual words, because I don't know, it fitted with what I feel so often every day, really. Some days I just feel so tired and weary of the unpredictability of this pandemic. Like a lot of folk, I've spent too much of my life being told what to do by others, so find it a struggle to motivate myself to do the things I need to do. And I thought, you know, that applies to so many of us, doesn't it? You know, whether what we believe, what we do, we've been told how to do it, and it all seemed so clear, and this pandemic has thrown everything up in the air. And I was thinking, do you remember right at the beginning when we started doing No Shore in Sight, some of the messaging from the church truly worried us, because it was very black and white. It was faith, not fear, which was really, yes, very stark.
Yeah, well, the problem with that, of course, was that very few people were experiencing only faith or only fear.
Yeah.
Most people were knowing a bit of faith or a lot of faith and some fear. There was a lot to fear at the time.
Everything has been heightened. In fact, I think I wouldn't say black and white now. I think I'd say Technicolor, really. When I think of black and white, I tend to think of grainy old television. Yes. And do you remember the very first time we saw colour television?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Can you remember what we were doing?
Well, it would be through a shop window, probably.
It was.
And it was. Now, you and I are not sure about this, whether it was golf or snooker, but it could have been either, because, or perhaps both at different times, because with the snooker, at last you could see the colour of the balls on the table.
Yes.
And with golf, you could see the ball. With the black and white golf on a not particularly good weather day, it was very difficult to see. But we were amazed. We stood there like, I was just goggle-eyed.
How can this be that you can have colour in television? That does show how old we are, doesn't it, really? But it just brought everything was heightened suddenly, wasn't it? And in a way, I suppose that's where we are now. Everything's heightened, fears and hopes, vaccine versus virus. And of course, that polarisation is what was so dangerous in the US. I don't know about other people, but we seem to be learning more and more about what happened on that day and the people that were involved in. And it wasn't just one type of person.
No,
again, there wasn't black, and there was white as well. There were people really believing they were fighting against wrong.
Yeah.
I think we've always, I don't know what you think. I think we've been sort of drawn to the little man fighting against the giant, like David and Goliath, or
and that shows how misleading it can be, that you follow that impulse. It could be right or it could be wrong. It's not easy at the moment.
No, it's not. No, it's really not easy at all. Because I grew up in Norwich. Now, do you remember me taking you up to a place called Mousehold? Well, there was
I do.
That sort
was
of
that to Kiss Me?
Oh, well, it might have been. But what I'm talking about is that there was a rebellion by the peasants. It was all to do with enclosure of lands and them feeling that was wrong. And there was a landowner called Ket who actually, them having, I don't know, tried to attack him because of this land enclosure. He then led them, and they went up onto Mousehold Heath. And when you stand there, you can see right over Norwich. And as a child growing up, I used to think, that is so exciting to be, standing there and thinking, I'm going to fight for what I believe is right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he was
hanged
in the end, so it's
not
a great ending.
But I think some of those people who were storming the Capitol, I saw some of them were proud of what they did, and they felt a kind of triumph about being right and big crosses and everything.
Well, that was the Christians. Yeah.
I know. No, I'm not saying they're right. I don't think they were right at all myself, but I can see how you would be filled with excitement because you felt you were righting some wrong. So it isn't quite as simple as saying that there's evil about.
No, but I think it is a case, isn't it, that right through history, even the Bible, like you said, we just said, there was a big cross outside, some people praying and really believing what they were doing right, and other people, with every weapon that they could find. And it is true, isn't it, that Bibles and rifles in the wrong hands have been used right through history.
Well, we've also seen that recently, haven't we? Bibles and rifles. Well, I wrote this some years ago. At that time, I visited Northern Ireland
It's in the middle of what they would call
in the middle of the Troubles. And it's called Bibles and Rifles. Bibles and rifles, handled by amateurs, paper and metal, tear us apart. Fixing their sights on the heart of reality, Bibles and rifles, there from the start. Rifles and Bibles, crashing through history, leather and wood, wounding and tears, aiming and blaming and shattering mystery, rifles and Bibles, ring in our ears, Bibles and trifles and foibles and rifles and rifles and Bibles and Bibles and rifles, handled by amateurs, they ring in our ears. Even the best things in the wrong hands for the wrong reasons become very, very dangerous.
Well, we've only got to think about apartheid, which at the time, the Dutch Reform, they believed it was right. They could find the context in the Bible, couldn't they?
Yeah,
and then, like I say, there was no one type of person there. There never is. There are the vulnerable people with mental illness, or people who felt incredibly neglected, people who felt they haven't been listened to, people who are frustrated. There's some people love a fight. There's no doubt about that. There always have been some people who love a fight. But so many different people.
Do you remember the chap in the Tiananmen Square standing there?
Yeah, of course I do.
Such an extraordinarily vivid image.
And that was right, but then it isn't always. And then, of course, there are leaders, the wrong sort of leaders.
Yeah, there are leaders. I think we've known people who've suffered from power getting too much of a hold, certainly in the church with leaders, and people running on past what their responsibility actually is. The need to dominate, to have loyal followers, to have people who help you to retain your image of yourself. I think there are real problems with this, and of course,
there always were, weren't there?
Absolutely. Jesus and Paul and Peter were always talking about making sure you listen to the right people. Peter talking about false prophets, saying false teachers will sneak in and speak harmful lies to you. But he was saying they don't actually belong to the master who paid a great price for them, and they will eventually destroy themselves. But in the course of doing that, as we've seen over the last 100 years, a lot of people get hurt and lost.
Yes, in those cases, what Jesus, Paul and Peter, you mentioned those three, and they all said the same thing, didn't they? They basically said, go back to Jesus, check it out. Yeah. Check out whether this feels like the way, the truth, and the life. It's not always easy to see that path, though, really, is it?
It's very difficult to stay safe, I think. And obviously you have to question the things you see and hear. I remember when I was about 15 or so, or 16 maybe, and I was in the youth club at church in Tunbridge Wells then.
Oh, that meant a huge amount to you, didn't it?
It was very important, yeah. I think, as with many teenagers, a lot of it is being with a group of other teenagers.
Yeah, there were some very pretty girls there too, weren't there? I seem to remember you telling me. You don't remember that at all.
But anyway, there was one fateful evening in one of the meetings. One of the chaps stood up, one of the teenagers, and said, very courageously, really, he said, I just want to say that all the things we keep saying about having Jesus in our hearts and knowing he's there and all the other stuff, I don't actually believe that. It hasn't happened to me. And there was a silence, and then a few others also said it was the same for them. And I think the same thing, if you're not careful, will happen now, and that is that you end up with a consensus, which is not a consensus that is helpful. It's a consensus of corporate expression, so that you end up as a group, as a church, as a denomination, saying, towing the party line. It sounds good. It sounds as though you can relate to it. In fact, the only thing that really counts is what is happening to me or to you. Those things may be useful, probably are, but in the end, you're looking at what's happening inside you.
Well, I go with that in terms of what you were talking about, but there seems to be a bit of a weird problem at the moment, doesn't there? I mean, I've talked to several people actually who, despite the overwhelming evidence of this pandemic, despite the constant images on our televisions and in the news and in our newspapers of medics and nurses at the end of their energy and of people dying and families in tragedy, are still denying there's a pandemic and still saying the numbers are completely falsified and using maybe one example of when something goes wrong to support a view that they're hanging on to.
There was a nurse on television, wasn't there, saying she comes out of work having held the hand of people who've died and has to pass people with posters saying that the pandemic is a hoax.
Yes, and the vaccine is a hoax, and so on and so on. I suppose what we're talking about, though, is that maybe is a way of keeping safe, denial of things that are just too much for us, and emotions are riding very high at the moment, aren't they?
They are indeed, yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. That in itself isn't a problem.
Real positives, aren't there, in heightened emotion?
Yeah, and I remember Jesus, the famous time when the 4 men let the man, we've mentioned this before, letting their friend down on a bed through the roof. They broke the roof open, and they jumped the queue, and they were so overwhelmed with wanting their friend to be helped, and Jesus didn't say go to the end of the queue and you can wait another 2 hours, because I think he admired the passion they felt. Passion is really needed.
Yes, and we talked about the Technicolor. We talked about black and white going into Technicolor, and the very best of music, and the very best of art, and the very best of poetry, and the very best of. They do that, don't they? They're full of emotion and colour. I mean, I'm not going to read it now because I think we're going to run out of time, but you've only got to think of somebody like Gerard Manley Hopkins and The Wind Hover. And I caught this morning Morning's Minion, and off he goes. Yeah. And it just sweeps you up into something so stunning. It's Technicolor.
I think in the end, probably, what we have to say is someone suggested it to me. We were talking about the fact that things aren't black or white, and what about grey in the middle? And she said to me, perhaps there's silver. And I think there is a precious metal in the middle there somewhere, between black and white. I was just talking to a friend recently, and after we'd spoken, I was thinking about myself and the things that have driven me in my Christian life, and I realised that there are false borders sometimes. There's a part of me driving towards proving it's all a load of rubbish so that I can abandon it, and there's a part of me absolutely determined to carry on and be with Jesus and all those things. And as I travel along those two paths, I'm moving from path to path occasionally, but I think actually that it's a false division. It's all learning and it's all acquiring truth. And I'm very grateful to God that now I am resolved in that. But I can see how as you travel, you move from one area of thinking and feeling to another, and you have to do that.
Well, I think you probably do if you really want to journey, because those doubts and questionings, I mean, I actually think they're vital. I think they're as necessary, almost like a vaccine, because what happens is that you bring something like doubt in, and it sort of kickstarts your spiritual immune system, I think, and it produces antibodies because you're working with it to fight evil. And I something I read a long time ago, Adrian. It's by a guy called Tim Keller, that is a very, very wise sort of person. But I love this, and when I was thinking about it this week, I hunted it down, and it still resonated with me. I'm going to read it. A faith without some doubts is like a human body without any antibodies in it. People who blithely go through life too busy or indifferent to ask hard questions about why they believe as they do will find themselves defenceless against either the experience of tragedy or the probing questions of a smart skeptic. A person's faith can collapse almost overnight if he or she has failed over the years to listen patiently to their own doubts, which should only be discarded after long reflection.
Well, I'm not sure whether we've been very helpful today.
What you think we've thrown up?
No. I think it's not an easy path to tread, and I think what you've just read is very, very helpful. That you take everything into account. You don't jump too quickly, but you remember that what matters in the end is what is happening in you.
Yes, and if you get stuck, you check it out with Jesus. It's probably keep you safe.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, it's been quite a week.
Yeah. We'll see you next week.
We will.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.